Hey guys, Stefan Fischer here from All Off Road. Thank you very much for joining me today in part 2 of the Ultimate Simpson Desert Travel Guide. If you haven't checked out part 1, I would strongly suggest you do so first. In part 2, I also cover a very controversial subject, and that is towing trailers through the desert. And now let's get into part 2. I again cover many subjects, including the controversial question if you should tow a camper trailer. I encourage you to watch the entire episode, but you can also choose specific topics via the chapter markers. Is your electrical setup up to scratch? I assume you will be running a fridge freezer on your desert trip, and you also like to charge your camera and various auxiliary devices. So a dual battery setup with a secondary AGM or LiFePO4 auxiliary battery would be highly recommended. It is not advisable to run your fridge or anything permanently connected to your starter battery, as these could leave you stranded without being able to start your car. If you have an auxiliary battery setup, it is important to ensure you protect your starter battery via low voltage battery disconnect. For the past 3 years, I run two 100 amp-hour DCS lithium batteries under the bonnet, which are connected in parallel with a battery protection that disconnects all auxiliary loads at 12.8 volt to leave always around 20% in the batteries for starting. The batteries are charged straight from my M2K high output alternator. Before my dual lithium setup, I had a secondary AGM charged by Redarc BCDC 1240D. Which is a great DC-DC charger and the only one suitable for under bonnet application. However, you still have to choose carefully where to install it under the bonnet. My auto electrician at the time, which I don't use anymore, thought it is a good idea to install the charger between the headlight and the second battery. And without much airflow because of slow desert driving and high outside temperatures, the DC-DC charger was derated and cut off charging after only an hour or two of driving per day. So I can tell you, losing your fridge in the desert, it's not nice. In Alice Springs, we moved the BCDC 1240D right behind the radiator grill, and on the return desert crossing had no issues anymore. So choose the location carefully if you install a BCDC under the bonnet. Recovery gear. Make sure you have 2 rated recovery points on the front of your 4-wheel drive, and if you have a tow hitch, I would also recommend a recovery hitch. You can either have a soft shackle suited recovery hitch or a bow shackle hitch. With the correct tire pressure and throttle control, you should not get stuck too often on any of the regular desert crossings. However, if you do cross country, how I often do, or if you get caught up in the desert when it's raining, it is absolutely necessary to carry a rated recovery kit for your vehicle weight. While I have many different recovery kits and brands at home, I recently started carrying the Sabre 12K Ultimate Recovery Kit. They also have an 8K kit for lighter 4-wheel drives like a Prado or dual cab Ute. The basic recovery gear I would recommend to carry for a Simpson Desert crossing is one kinetic recovery rope or alternatively a snatch strap, one Sabre Pro utility rope or alternatively a bridle or tree trunk protector, 2 soft shackles and 1 dampener. If you have a winch, I would also recommend carrying a winch ring. Why use kinetic ropes over snatch straps? The benefit is that it has around 50% more stretch than a snatch strap, which means you put way less shock load on your vehicle. It's in particularly helpful if you tow and, for instance, need assistance in driving over a dune. If you transition to soft shackles, which I would recommend as it is a lighter and safer option, make sure your anchor points are nice and smooth without sharp edges. Sabre do have Technora-bound soft shackles, which add an additional layer of protection and cut resistance and allows you to use a soft shackle temporarily with a not perfectly smooth and round anchor point. At the end, this is just the recovery gear I currently carry. Any good rated recovery gear set will do. If you're new to 4-wheel driving and you don't know how to recover safely, make sure you do a 4-wheel drive course where you learn how to recover safely. Traction boards or max tracks. In my book, one of the most overrated and reasonably heavy item to carry for a standard desert crossing. Let's face it, you rarely get stuck on flat ground. The most common thing to happen would be your forward momentum being stopped ascending dunes. Rarely will traction boards give you enough traction on an incline to continue. It's way easier to just reverse back and have a second go. If that does not work, you need to change something. Lower tire pressure further, choose a different gear or line, more or less momentum. If you're in a group and one vehicle really can't make it over a dune, a gentle snatch is quicker and more effective than stuffing around with traction boards. I do have a set of ARB Thread Pros, which I do carry on remote desert trips, mainly for clay pans. But in all these years, I never needed or wished for traction boards to recover myself. However, if you travel alone or tow a trailer, it may be worthwhile carrying a set or two.
I thought I share a couple of Outback tips which I, came across on my travels with you. Tip number one, if you have two separate fuel tanks, I recommend that you use always half of each tank. So you start with the main tank where you have the most fuel in, drain that half, then you're going to use the second tank half, and then you go back to the first tank.
Which means it is less likely for you to lose a full tank because of a leak you did not notice. And yes, I do speak from experience here. Do you need a winch for a desert crossing? For any of the standard desert crossings, definitely not. However, a winch is overall probably the best, safest, if you know how to use it, and most controlled and versatile recovery tool you can have, especially if you have less capable vehicles or drivers in your group. And yes, a winch can be useful even in the desert without trees, as long as you travel in a group, because you can use a different four-wheel drive as an anchor point for the winch. I have been on cross-country desert trips where the winch was used often to recover other four-wheel drives. However, I never used it on a standard desert crossing. So if you don't have a winch, no need to run out and purchase one for a standard desert crossing, but overall it is a good insurance to have. Roof racks. I have a roof rack permanently mounted on my Land Cruiser and also had one permanently mounted on my 110 Defender. So if you need to carry a roof rack, ensure it's a sturdy yet lightweight, high quality rack which is installed properly. Check that all bolts are tight and that you have the required tools to retighten them during the trip. Please keep in mind that the dynamic load rating for a roof rack is usually only somewhere between 50 and 80 kilogram max for on-road use, not off-road use. And that also includes the weight of the actual rack. This is calculated for sealed roads, not bumpy off-road driving. A 50% load rating reduction for off-road will apply if you have a clamp-mounted roof rack system, and the maximum load rating is reduced by 33% for all other mounting types of roof racks. So if you do the math, theoretically you can hardly carry any weight on top of your roof. So only pack light stuff on your roof rack, like swags, chairs and so on, and ensure it's well secured. If you need to carry some fuel on the roof, make sure you empty the jerrys as soon as you can into the tank. The general packing rule is all heavy items centered between the axles and as low as possible to keep the center of gravity down. Sleeping gear. Using a rooftop tent, swag, ground tent or stretcher is a personal choice and depends on your preferences. I prefer the quick setup stretcher tent for myself as I don't sleep well on the ground anymore. Otherwise I would be using a swag. If I take the kids, they have their own swag which can be easily set up and packed down by themselves. A few things are universal though for desert camping. Don't be fooled. The desert can be very cold. I had many nights down to -7 degrees Celsius. So for winter desert camping you will need a good winter sleeping bag with a comfort rating of at least -5 for cold sleepers. Or you can use a dual sleeping bag solution as I do. You will also need a good well-insulated winter mattress with an R rating of R5 or higher. I would not recommend a normal air mattress. It is also good to have a set of merino wool long johns and a long arm top. For added comfort, I also carry a sheepskin, which I can use as an underlay, but also as a seat cushion when sitting around the fire at night. A great weight and space-saving alternative to regular camping chairs are these ultralight Helinox chairs. I purchased the first one over 3 years ago and now only carry Helinox chairs on my desert travels because they are so much lighter and take so much less space. If you need a stretcher for your tent, I can only recommend the Helinox ultralight stretchers. They are not cheap, but they pack very small. They are super light, only 3 kilogram, and are very comfortable. The system how to put them together takes less than 3 minutes and is ingenious. So I absolutely love them, even though they are quite expensive. I did a dedicated winter sleeping solutions video to explain my setup in more detail. Don't ignore this. Being cold at night is miserable and can spoil the trip. The right clothing for the desert. For a winter desert trip, you need to prepare for moderate daytime temperatures between 20 to 30 degrees Celsius and possible cold evenings, nights and mornings, which can drop well below 0 degrees Celsius. The more you get to the fringe season, like spring and autumn, the bigger the chance for hotter daytime temperatures. On one trip in October, we had several days of 49 degrees in the Simpson Desert. I would recommend a layered approach. Here is my clothing list for a 2 weeks trip. As base layers, I use 5 pairs of bamboo underwear. I find that I can wear them longer than pure cotton. 5 pairs of cotton, bamboo or merino wool socks. 2 to 3 ultra-fine merino short-arm t-shirts. I like the Icebreaker Cool Light shirts. 2 cotton short-arm t-shirts. 2 mid-weight merino long-arm shirts. 1 pair of merino long johns, 2 pairs of cotton travel shorts, and if you need, 1 pair of long trousers. As a mid-layer I take 1 heavyweight merino wool or fleece jumper, 2 long-arm cotton or linen work shirts with a high collar and ventilation. I often also take a padded and insulated flannel work shirt. As a jacket I would recommend 1 Gore-Tex wind and rain jacket and 1 light down jacket. However, just watch it around the fire as flying embers will burn holes instantly. If you can afford it, go for a good wool jacket, but they cost anywhere between $400 to $800, so I haven't gotten one either. For shoes, I like to wear a pair of light desert boots and merino or bamboo socks for driving. But I also have a few pairs of Archie's flip-flops for camp life. If you really have an issue with flies, I would recommend to also bring a fly net. In winter, I used to wear a lot of synthetic fabrics, like fleeces. But over the past 2 years, I started transitioning back to merino wool as I find it lasts longer, it's way more breathable and comfortable, it smells less, especially if you need to wear stuff longer without a wash, and small embers from a fire will not burn holes as easily as with synthetic fabric. Not to mention that's also easy recyclable and you have no microfiber pollution. Weather forecasts. While the weather in the desert is mostly dry, these can change. And if you think it's only sand that gets easier in the wet, that is unfortunately not the case. While there is a lot of sand, there are also huge clay pans in between the dunes and they become impassable in wet weather. Especially if unsure, call Mount Dare or Birdsville Police for a weather update and make sure you don't ignore local advice like this family with kids did.
A family stranded in the SA outback following recent flooding could be confined to their camper for weeks.
A rescue aircraft drops a lifeline to the family of 4 inside this bogged Mitsubishi Canter.
The family was eventually airlifted out and the Canter was recovered by Graham from Mount Dare several weeks later. After rain, many outback roads are closed and there are heavy penalties for not observing road closure signs, so make sure you follow the advice and closure signs. Just a little tip here, if you ever camp at Birdsville and there is heavy rain forecast, do not camp down by the lagoon and make sure you get one of the few spots which is high up and not in any valley, because I have seen everything underwater there and tents and swags flooded with mud. UHF Desert Etiquette, the common UHF channel for the Simpson Desert, is channel 10. Please make sure the channel is not used for general group banter, as this becomes quite annoying for other people. Keep in mind that the UHF can be heard often long distances, especially north-south, so you can hear chatter from the French line on the rig road. It is sufficient to announce your party, number of vehicles, line and direction of travel every few dunes from the top of a dune, not in the swale. Please don't announce the approach, cresting and descent of each dune to your fellow group members. Some of the dunes now have location markers when you approach. Let the lead vehicle announce the direction, the number of vehicles and location marker. Don't do these for every vehicle in the group. If you meet oncoming traffic, the driver of the lead vehicle should have a quick chat about the numbers and order of travel. Always have a look ahead to the next dune when you crest to see if you have oncoming traffic. Drive with your daylight driving lights on, as these makes your vehicle far more visible. I again have a detailed video about UHF Desert Etiquette. Please check it out if you need more details. Desert Toilet Etiquette. It is a bit sad that this needs to be explained, but unfortunately quite a few people don't know how to go to the toilet for number 2 in the desert. And this results in toilet paper greeting you along remote desert treks. If you need to go for number 2, grab a shovel and some toilet paper. If you use wet wipes, make sure they are biodegradable. Also take a squeeze bottle with a little methylated spirit and a fire lighter. Walk away from the camp or any water course, not too many are in the desert, and find yourself a good spot to squat. Ideally, not on top of a spinifex lump, because it can hurt. Dig a hole at least 30 to 40 centimeter deep. Don't have it too shallow, as the dingoes can smell and dig well. Do your business. Wipe. Place the paper in the hole, squeeze some methylated spirit on top of the used paper, and light. Don't do it the other way around. Wait till the toilet paper is burned and then cover the hole with sand. Place a stick on top so no one else digs it up accidentally. Females should use the same procedure for number 1 and 2. Have a bottle of hand sanitizer ready in the car. Personal hygiene. How to keep clean the desert. There are quite a few options and I would say I tried the most. Number 1, use wet wipes to give yourself a wipe down in the evening. Please note, most wet wipes are made out of plastic and they don't decompose, so please carry them back out in your rubbish. I use fully compostable bamboo fiber wet wipes as toilet paper, which are fully biodegradable. Another option, if you have room, would be to carry an extra 20-liter water jerry can and then use a collapsible bucket and a companion lithium-ion shower to have quick showers and rinse-offs. Depending on how frugal you are, these may give you 3 to 5 quick soaps and rinses. And if done towards the end of the day, it will have warm water if the jerry can was stored on your rear wheel carrier. The last option is the one I use most when I do longer cross-country trips where water is at a premium. I explained this on a Madigan video a few years ago, so here it is.
Good morning, guys. It's day 6 or 7, I'm not sure to be honest. In the Simpson Desert on the Madigan line. Yeah, it's nearing its end. I think we have one more night, but I thought I share how I keep clean in 6, 7, 8 days in the desert. What I'm using to wash. I've got a routine every morning, which I have to say it's pretty cold because when you get up it is fresh. But I've got a few face washes. I've got a thermos can of warm water. One face washer actually for the different regions, obviously. Have a face washer. Put a little bit of salt, tiny little bit, smitten, and then warm water. Good rinse. Dry down again, and you do that for the different regions. And to be honest, you feel pretty much clean. It's not the sticky, sweaty thing which usually after 3-4 days, you feel, personally I do not feel comfortable, but that works actually excellent.
Sorry for the short interruption, but I have to ask. There has been an incredible amount of work in this video, so if it's helpful to you, it would be greatly appreciated if you could help me too by liking, subscribing and leaving a comment. If you can, also let the video run in its entirety, as it will help how often YouTube shows the video. The pinnacle of awesomeness would be if you shout me a cup of coffee or two via Patreon or buy me a coffee. Thank you very much. Campfires. I love a campfire as much as anyone, and it is an essential part of a camping trip, especially in winter. However, as you can probably appreciate, trees and firewood are scarce in the desert. Dead trees and branches also provide an habitat for many of the desert creatures. The few Gidgee trees which grow take a long time to do so. Please also take note that all the areas marked in red here is National Park, and there are no fires allowed at all in National Park. The only exception is the Mount Dare campground. While there is no fire ban in the desert, it is recommended to bring your own clean, milled firewood and use previous campfire sites. If you decide to use native wood, have small indigenous style cooking fires, not huge bonfires. If you decide to burn rubbish like paper bags or paper towels, make sure you do it at the beginning and that there's absolutely no residue. Nothing worse than coming to camp and finding rubbish in a fireplace. Make sure to extinguish your fire as best as you can before you leave camp. Do you need an awning for the Simpson Desert? To be honest, it's not essential, but if your roof rack weight allows, having an awning can be helpful. As you can imagine, being a desert, it's usually a pretty dry environment. You don't often need to shelter from rain, and because of the low moisture content in the air, you usually also don't have much dew at night or in the mornings. So in most cases, your tent, swag or stretcher won't be wet in the morning. While I usually carry a Superpack 270 awning on one side of the Land Cruiser and a Superpack Easy awning on the other side, for the desert I only take a single awning, which I rarely set up at night. However, I still carry it as it provides shelter from the sun if there is an unplanned stop or if we get to camp early or leave late. If it ever rains in the desert, you also want to have some cover. So if you have room and capacity for the weight, I would recommend carrying one awning. Do you need a light bar or driving lights for the Simpson Desert? Definitely not a requirement, especially if you're not planning to drive at night. However, in saying that, we never plan to do a night drive, but somehow end up always driving at least one night into the dark. So if you never drive at night, you obviously don't need a light bar. However, for me it is a safety device because if you have to drive at night, either because you are late or maybe even because of a medical emergency, it can be unsafe with regular lights off-road. The light output of regular driving lights is just not sufficient. Also, if you need to drive off-road at night, obstacles look very different. So for me, it's not so much about penetration and distance, but a perfect combination between distance and illumination and light pattern. I have owned many mid-level and high-end light bars, and at the moment run the laser lamp RR1250 mounted on the bull bar and the laser lamps T24 Evolution mounted under the roof rack. So far I found the laser lamps to have the best penetration and light pattern, which just provides a even very comfortable illumination. Very hard to describe, but check out my video where I compare it with the Ultravision light bars. One question often asked is if you should mount the light bar on the bull bar or on the roof rack. Personally, especially if you only mount one light bar, I definitely prefer the bull bar. As in my experience, it provides better light output and you have no reflections from the bonnet or antenna. I have done a few reviews about different light bars like Ultravision, Firelight and laser lamps. Check it out on my channel if you are interested. So as a conclusion, while it's not necessary, it's good to have additional driving lights or a light bar. However, the laser lights are top of the line light bars and probably overkill for someone who does not use them often. So keep in mind, any additional light you can get is better than no additional light. And there are plenty of cheap options out there if you don't tour too much.
Tip number 2. I strongly suggest that you actually exchange car keys with one of your co-travelers. Or if you solo travel, store it somewhere securely which you can access if your vehicle is locked. I had that happen to me with the Defender where the kids somehow locked the doors at Glen Davis and that was it. Fortunately, one window was slightly open, so after a bit mucking around with wires and so on, I could retrieve my keys. But really good practice to take a second set of keys and store that somewhere safely when you travel.
Traction and stability control. Make sure you familiarize yourself with the features of your four-wheel drive and carry a manual with you. Any car built after November 2013 will have ESC, Electronic Stability Control, not to be confused with traction control. ESC is for on-road driving and is quite a hindrance off-road, so it needs to be disabled in sand. Traction control is also not required in most sand driving scenarios, unless you ascend steep dunes with cross-axle wombat holes, where one wheel loses contact with the ground. This is where I would try to switch traction control on and see how that goes. If you like more in-depth information about these, please watch my sand driving video. Road, all-terrain or mud-terrain tires. To be honest, tire profile matters little in the desert. Even a road tire at the correct pressure would provide enough floatage. However, road tires are not very sturdy and are susceptible to tire punctures. They are also not designed to be run at low tire pressure. A few so-called four-wheel drive experts tell you mud-terrain tires don't work well in sand. This is absolute BS. I have run mainly BFG mud-terrain tires for the past 8 years, as they perform very well in any terrain and condition. I have done I don't know how many sand driving trips to Fraser Island, Tasmania, Moreton Island, South Australia's beaches, as well as countless desert trips, and yet have to get stuck in sand. Any good quality LT all-terrain tire or mud-terrain tire at the correct pressure will do fine in the desert. I definitely would not travel on road tires or non-LT all-terrain tires, as a tire failure is nearly guaranteed. If you purchase a new set of all-terrain tires, make sure they are light truck construction. Otherwise, they also have weak sidewalls. I run BFG KM3 mud-terrain tires, as they perform well in every terrain, have a robust tire construction and can be run at low pressure without issues. In over 9 years of hard touring on BFG, I have not had a catastrophic tire failure. For full disclosure, I am a BFG ambassador. Check all of my videos over the past 9 years and see how the tires did in real life. And trust me, I would not run a set of tires on my car which do not perform. If you only tour once or twice a year and use your car also as your daily driver, I probably would not recommend mud-terrain tires, but a set of good quality AT-LT tires, for example the BFG KO2s. However, if you already have mud-terrain tires on your vehicle, perfect, just take them into the desert. Desert driving. The two most important things for sand driving are tire pressure and throttle control. Let's start with the tire pressure. While it's hard to give you a universal PSI to air down to, as the correct pressure depends on the tire size, construction, and as well the weight of your four-wheel drive. A good guideline is that you can air down to the same PSI as your rim size. For instance, you have a 16-inch rim, air down to 16 PSI. If you have an 18-inch rim, air down to 18 PSI. And from there you can further adjust up or down. You may say, hold on, doesn't it mean I roll the tire off the bead if I run too low pressure? Well, there is a slim chance of this happening. In 10 years of desert travel and sand driving, I've never had it happen to me, nor have I seen it happening to anyone in our group. Let me give you an example here where we play in South Australia's dunes, and we certainly do far sharper turns on 15 psi than we usually would do on a desert crossing, and absolutely no issues with tires rolling off the beat. On 35-inch BFG KM3s, my go-to standard sand pressure is around 15 psi hot, but I have gone down as low as 10 psi. I'm always surprised how many people still get the tire pressure wrong. Okay.
I probably should get the tyres down a bit more perhaps.
What are you down to?
Yeah, about 27.
Yeah, you're on 16.
Yeah, right, yeah. I probably should do that.
Drive considerably and avoid sudden extreme steering maneuvers, which are hardly ever required on sand, and you should have no issues. Keep in mind that if you air down while the tires are cold, after a little driving, the tire pressure will increase up to 4 psi again. So you may need to readjust your tire pressure after driving or as the daytime temperatures get hotter. Manual or automatic. An age-old debate that really comes down to personal preferences. I have driven the desert a few times in my manual 110 Defender, but even more often in my Land Cruiser 105 with a 5-speed auto box. Overall, I prefer auto. However, in the desert I drive it often in manual mode to reduce stress on the gearbox. I also have an additional stacked transmission cooler to keep the temperatures down. I often hear people say manual is more reliable. Interestingly, I never had reliability issues with my auto boxes, but have replaced the manual box of the Defender at only 80,000 kilometers. Go figure. Anyway, the Desert is no issue with an auto or manual gearbox. In a manual gearbox, the choice of gear depends on your gearing and the dune, but second low is usually a good start. High or low range. Depending on your setup, you probably could do most of the Desert in four-wheel drive high range. However, I still would recommend doing the dune ascents in low range as it reduces stress on your driveline and gearbox, especially with an auto box. Switch to high range on the long straight stretches and clay pans if you need to. Always drive in four-wheel drive. Two-wheel drive has no place in the Desert. Throttle control. Here we have to differentiate between two different technologies. A solid axle vehicle with bigger tires, good suspension travel and possibly diff locks versus a more common IFS vehicle with usually smaller tires, way less suspension travel and often traction control instead of lockers. The latter usually needs a little more speed and more momentum, and you may need to drive through a little wheel spin for the traction control to kick in. However, the most common mistake is to not get off the throttle as soon as your forward momentum is stopped, and that means you will dig yourself in deeper, sometimes up to the frame. So the most important thing for sand driving, if your forward momentum is stopped, foot off the throttle ASAP. Let me show you a little clip here where Ian shows perfectly how it's done. As soon as he realizes his forward momentum is stopped, he takes a foot off the throttle, which allows him to easily reverse back out. He then has a second attempt with a little bit more speed and drives it easily. If this is your first desert trip and you have little experience in crossing dunes, I would recommend spending an hour or two on one of the first steeper dunes to fine-tune your pressure and throttle control. I find it an excellent exercise to try to crawl a dune as slow as possible, but with a constant forward momentum, and as little wheel spin as possible. If your forward progress is stopped, immediately take the foot off the throttle to avoid excessive wheel spin, as these digs the holes you're probably sitting in. If you continue spinning wheels, you may get bogged to the extent where you can't self-recover. If your forward momentum is stopped, just reverse back out. Make sure the wheels are straight when reversing back. Try this a few times to get the feel of how much throttle you need to not get stuck. Also play with the tire pressure to find the pressure where you can easily cruise up most dunes. One of the finer intricacies of dune driving is to find the right momentum and to reduce throttle input just before you crest a dune. Done too early, your forward momentum may be stopped just before you crest. Leave it too late, you may be shooting over the crest with too much speed. That can be dangerous, as sometimes you have a change of direction on top of the dune, and it also gives you less chance to react if another vehicle is cresting from the opposite direction. You sometimes come across these really chopped up dunes with a lot of cross-axle holes caused by people getting stuck and spinning wheels. There are two approaches to these dunes. Slow and steady, which does work if you have good suspension travel and can maintain contact with the ground, even if your wheel is in one of the deeper holes. For IFS vehicles, this often means quite a few attempts, traction control or lockers engaged. The tip I give you now should only be attempted if you have reasonably good suspension suited to the weight of your vehicle, and it only works if the holes are not too far apart. But unlike what you may think, speed is actually your friend, as the suspension does not have the chance to fully compress or droop. So try the little faster approach and see whether it works for you. However, always ensure you drive to conditions. And you may be surprised how easy and smooth the ride is in comparison to doing it slowly. However, this is not a good idea if your vehicle is overloaded and the suspension hits the bump stops easily. One thing I hate is finding rubbish in pristine, remote locations. So please make sure that anything you bring to the desert is also carried back out. This starts for me in my packing process, and I remove as many wrappings and unnecessary packaging as possible when packing. However, on a few weeks trip you will accumulate rubbish, and I hate to have refuse smelling in the car. So I carry a custom-made heavy-duty spare wheel rubbish bag I could not live without. When you exit the desert, Birdsville and Dalhousie Springs both have a tip where you can get rid of your rubbish. So please, keep the desert clean and leave nothing but tire tracks and footprints. Driving on corrugated roads. Corrugated roads are not only occurring in Australia, but it's probably the only country that has nearly 1800 kilometers of continuous corrugation on tracks like the Canning Stock route. Even to and from the Simpson Desert you can have stretches of bad corrugation, especially between Mount Dare and Dalhousie Springs, depending on when it was graded last. There are a few things you can do to make corrugation more bearable. On gravel roads I air down to between 25 and 28 psi. On top of that, good suspension really is your friend. Good adjustable remote reservoir shocks can make a huge difference. If you have good suspension, speed is your friend over corrugation. The correct speed seems to depend on vehicle and wheelbase. For me it's around 80 km per hour. However, that is not always possible, so ensure you adhere to local speed limits and drive to conditions.
And another little tip, guys. If you air up your tires, I would recommend that you air up in pairs, so the rear first and then the front. On one of my trips my compressor actually failed in the middle, and I was still pretty much 50 k's or so from the next service station, and I had to air down again. So it's wise if you air up, for example, the rear first and your compressor dies, you actually still can drive. Feels a bit funny if you're on one side, you know.
Off-road navigation. I use digital GPS navigation apps exclusively for many years now and have tested and used most applications on the market. Unfortunately, there is no perfect app and all have some shortcomings somewhere. My recommendation for the Simpson Desert would be memory maps with the HEMA 4-wheel drive map pack, as the old HEMA specialty desert maps are good and provide quite a bit of additional information many other maps don't. The new Memory Maps for All version, which I'm beta testing and consulting for the past few months, will soon be available to the public and has some great new features I really enjoy. One of these new features is layers, which allows me to switch between two different maps and scales for the same area with one click. This is like having two iPads in one. It is absolutely brilliant and makes route planning so much easier. And as far as I know, is unique to Memory Maps for All. Memory Maps was the first GPS application I started with and I still use today. Another option would be Avenza app, which has many different maps available for separate purchase, including the HEMA or Get Lost map pack. However, it is way more difficult on the Avenza store to find the required maps, purchase them, download them and set up Avenza maps. I also still like and use Explore Oz Traveler app, though they are a little expensive as an overall package and on one hand don't have much information for the Simpson, for example like camp spots and so on, but on the other hand show tracks from users which are no tracks but just a cross-country line someone did at some stage. Whoever did this line several years ago thought it's a smart idea to submit it to the OpenStreetMap, and as such it now shows up on every OpenStreetMap even though there is absolutely no track, and it will lead you into peril unless you are very well prepared. Explore Oz Traveler still has too many inconsistencies and usability issues for me to wholly recommend it as the only app. As a budget option I could suggest DirtMap, which is Australian made, or OSM and Maps. However, both use OpenStreetMaps and as such have limited and some wrong information, in particular for the Simpson Desert. Any OpenStreetMap application is also bad for planning, as all OSM-based maps reduce the points of interest, roads, town names to near nothing when scaling out. So if you only want to purchase one application, especially for the Simpson Desert, I would recommend Memory Maps for All, including the HEMA 4-wheel drive map pack. Camper trailers. Camper trailers in the desert is a sensitive topic and often hotly debated. So let me clear these up first. National Park strongly discourages towing through the Simpson Desert, but at the date of making the video, this is not banned. But don't just take my word for it, have a look at the Mount Dare website, because Graham from Mount Dare does a lot of the recoveries out of the Simpson Desert, and see what his opinion is. If you ever pop into Mount Dare, have a chat with him and he will tell you very strongly that trailers should not be towed through the Simpson Desert. If you decide to tow, make sure you have some funds ready. The recovery of a 4-wheel drive and trailer can cost anywhere between $4,000 and $16,000 on one of the regular lines. I would like to make clear, I'm not a trailer hater. I have owned several camper trailers and also currently own one. I never towed any of my camper trailers through the Simpson Desert because I don't see the need for it and like to travel as light as possible. Nonetheless, on my first Simpson Desert trip many years ago, I joined a group who towed 2 trailers, and I have seen the additional effort required. I also accompanied the University of Bochum, Germany as a desert advisor when they tried to break the solar record with a solar buggy. Unfortunately, the solar buggy failed, which meant towing a trailer with the buggy through parts of the Simpson Desert. I made a video about both trips, so check them out. Also, having done many desert crossings, we have come across many people who towed and in some instances had the unfortunate opportunity to get caught up behind groups with trailers. Yes, a 4-wheel drive with incorrect tire pressure and a driver with no throttle control, besides a heavy right foot, causes more damage than an experienced driver with a capable vehicle towing a lightweight camper trailer. However, most people I've seen towing did not have the towing experience or the right towing vehicle and sometimes didn't have either of it. These caused many delays for groups behind them and also considerable track damage. If you nevertheless think you must tow through the Simpson, I would recommend the following. Have a reliable and capable 4-wheel drive with a sufficient power to weight ratio for your car and trailer. Tow a lightweight, quality off-road camper trailer. Don't use a Jayco or the likes. If it does make it, you will shave 10 years of its life. Have plenty of towing experience, especially in sand. Know well how to reverse a trailer down steep dunes. Travel in a group and ideally have at least one 4-wheel drive not towing. Have a complete recovery setup suited to your car and trailer weight and know how to use it. Make sure you run low tire pressure on your 4-wheel drive and trailer, usually same pressure for both. Calculate for at least 40% more fuel usage. Remember, trailer recovery from the Simpson Desert is a costly exercise. One other alternative, if the Simpson Desert is only one leg of your trip, is to store the trailer at Birdsville or Mount Dare. This allows you to do a stress-free double crossing, possibly even without the headache of towing. Dangerous animals and poisonous plants. Isn't everything out to kill you in Australia? All jokes aside, you don't have too much to fear in the desert regarding animals. I was lucky enough to come across a fear snake, also called an inland taipan, which is the most venomous snake in the world. You can count yourself lucky seeing a snake in the desert, as they usually stay well away from humans and are not too much seen on hot days or in cold nights. You may see dingoes if you're lucky, but they are usually quite shy and stay away from you. The only exception is Perny Boar, where some dingoes, which probably got fed by travelers, lost their shyness. And I have seen them stalking kids from the shower back to camp, so we needed to intervene. Don't let small kids walk alone around Perny Boar. And please don't feed or interact with wild dingoes. Again, if you are lucky, you may see some camels. However, in most cases you will only see their tracks. They are also shy and try to stay away from humans. One thing I can guarantee you will see plenty of, and that are flies. So prepare yourself for it mentally and carry a fly net for your head if it bothers you. Besides what many people believe, the desert is certainly not dead, and if you bother to get out and observe, you find plenty of small critters. And many of them are absolutely beautiful. So make sure you jump out of the car from time to time and look around and observe. While I'm no big birder, you certainly find quite a few birds around, like this Nankeen kestrel or these beautiful galahs. If you're lucky, you may also see some budgies, which I used to have as a pet bird as a child. Let me quickly explain 2 plants you may come across, which on first sight appear edible. The first one are various Solanum species. Some of them are called bush tomatoes and they are edible. Solanum diversiflorum. However, there are quite a few different species that look very similar and some are highly poisonous. So it's strongly recommended that people unfamiliar with the plant do not experiment with the different species, as differentiating between them can often be very difficult. The second plant you likely come across is the padymelon, which looks like a delicious watermelon. However, this plant is also poisonous and can't be eaten. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed my ultimate Simpson Desert travel guide and got some useful information out of it. If you did, please consider supporting me by heading over to Patreon or buy me a coffee and shout me the equivalent of a cup of coffee or two per month. Please also don't forget to share, like and subscribe, because it really helps for the video to be found due to the YouTube search algorithms. So long, I hope to see you along the tracks.